The war did not announce itself with explosions for everyone. For soldiers, war had uniforms. For generals, war had maps. But for ordinary people, war arrived quietly. It arrived in the way neighbors stopped talking, in the way shopkeepers closed their doors early, in the way parents whispered instead of speaking. In September 1939, millions of civilians across Europe woke up to a world that felt familiar, yet dangerously different. No one handed them weapons. No one gave them instructions. They were told only one thing: survive. A mother pulled her child closer as boots echoed down the street. An old man locked his door for the first time in 30 years. A boy learned that silence could be louder than screams. The streets still existed. The houses still stood. But safety was gone. People quickly realized something terrifying. Weapons would not save them. Strength would not save them. Only intelligence would. They learned to read faces, to sense danger before it arrived, to disappear without moving. At night, families sat in darkness, listening, not to bombs, but to footsteps. Every sound became a question. Is it safe? Or is it over? Children stopped playing. Adults stopped dreaming. Everyone started calculating. Which road is safest? Which neighbor can be trusted? Which words should never be spoken? This was not survival by force. This was survival by mind. And this was only the beginning. When the war settled in, people understood one brutal truth very quickly. To survive, you must not be seen. Cities were no longer places of safety. They were traps made of stone and noise. Basements became the first classrooms of survival. Families carried their lives underground. Blankets, bread, photographs, memories. The air was thick, damp, and heavy with fear. Candles flickered, not just to give light, but to remind people they were still alive. Children were taught a new rule. Do not cry. Do not speak. Do not move. A cough could invite death. A whisper could expose an entire family. In these basements, people learned how to measure time without clocks. They counted hours by footsteps above them. They learned the difference between friendly boots and hostile ones. Silence became a skill. People stopped wearing bright clothes. They darkened windows with blankets and paper. Lights were banned after sunset. A house that looked lived in was dangerous. A house that looked empty could survive. Neighbors who once shared meals now avoided eye contact. Trust became rare, because trust could get you killed. Some families dug hidden walls behind coal stacks. Others created false floors beneath beds. Attics were turned into invisible worlds where people existed between dust and darkness. Children grew up memorizing escape routes instead of songs. Mothers slept lightly, ready to wake everyone in seconds. Fathers listened for changes in sound. Engines, voices, silence that lasted too long. The smartest survivors learned one thing above all: never hide where everyone hides. If everyone chose basements, some chose walls. If everyone fled cities, some stayed perfectly still. Survival wasn't about strength. It was about prediction. Who will come? When will they come? What will they look for? People became invisible by understanding human behavior. They left no traces, no smoke, no noise, no patterns. Days blended into weeks, weeks into months, and underground, in the dark, a new kind of human was born. One who survived not by fighting, but by vanishing. As the war dragged on, one reality became unavoidable. Hiding alone was not enough. People could disappear from the streets, but hunger always found them. Money lost its meaning first. Banknotes became useless paper. Gold lost its shine. Titles, jobs, status, all meaningless. What mattered now was simple: food, warmth, information. Bread became power. Soap became currency. A single egg could decide whether a family lived another week. Markets still existed, but not openly. They moved into shadows, in back alleys, ruined courtyards, and abandoned buildings. Civilians began to trade quietly. No signs, no names, no promises. A woman might exchange her wedding ring for a sack of potatoes. A watch passed down for generations might buy milk for a child. Family heirlooms vanished one by one, traded for survival. People learned a dangerous skill: how to read strangers. A wrong trade could expose you. A wrong word could end everything. There were no receipts, no second chances. Children became messengers because adults were watched. Old men pretended to be beggars, listening more than speaking. Mothers memorized faces. Who could be trusted? Who could not? Information itself became a commodity. Which road is blocked? Where are patrols today? Which house was searched last night? Some people survived not because they were strong, but because they knew before others did. Bartering taught civilians the psychology of desperation. They learned when to walk away. They learned when silence was safer than hunger. Sometimes survival meant making impossible choices. A father trading his last coat. A mother choosing food for one child instead of two. A family deciding who would eat today and who would wait. Morality bent under pressure. People were not cruel. They were desperate. In this hidden economy, intelligence mattered more than bravery. The smartest traders never returned to the same place twice. They changed routes, changed times, changed faces. They understood one truth of war: predictability kills. By the third year of war, entire networks of silent survival existed beneath occupied cities. No leaders, no flags, only understanding. This was not resistance. This was not rebellion. This was existence. And for millions of civilians, trade, quiet, risky, human trade, became the thin line between life and death. For many civilians, hiding and trading were no longer enough. The cities were tightening. Checkpoints multiplied. Questions became sharper. Survival now required movement, but movement without being noticed. Escaping a city during war was not about speed. It was about timing. People waited for fog, for rain, for moments when fear distracted the guards as much as it terrified civilians. They traveled light, one bag, no photographs, no letters. Anything that tied them to a past life was a risk. Families learned to walk without urgency. Running meant guilt. Calm meant innocence. A mother rehearsed her story 100 times. Where are you going? Why are you here? Who are you? Children were trained to memorize new names, new birthdays, new villages. They learned to answer before thinking. Forged papers became lifelines. Not perfect ones, just believable enough. Ink smudges, uneven stamps, false signatures. People didn't need perfection. They needed confidence. The most dangerous part of escape wasn't the road. It was the question, a single pause, a single nervous glance, a single incorrect detail, and it was over. Some escaped by blending into columns of workers. Others pretended to be refugees, moving with the crowd. A few chose isolation, walking alone at night, following rivers, railways, tree lines. They learned geography not from maps, but from fear. Which bridge is watched? Which field hides footprints? Which village asks fewer questions? Not everyone made it. Some were turned back. Some vanished. Those who survived learned something harsh. Home was no longer a place. It was a condition. Safety existed only where you were not known. Children stopped asking where they were going. They asked only one thing: are we safe tonight? By the time they reached the countryside, people were different. Thinner, quieter, older. They had escaped the city, but the war followed them inside. Because once you learn to run silently, you never truly stop. Escaping the cities did not mean safety. It meant something far more difficult, becoming someone else. In villages and small towns, everyone knew everyone. Faces were remembered. Voices were recognized. Stories were compared. To survive here, civilians had to erase themselves. Names were changed first. A man who once answered proudly to his real name learned to forget it. A child practiced responding to a new one. Even in sleep, birthplaces shifted. A city became a village. A village became another village. Truth was dangerous. Simplicity was survival. People dressed plainly. Too clean meant suspicious. Too poor meant questions. They learned how to blend, how to hold farming tools without looking unfamiliar, how to nod instead of speak, how to laugh at jokes they didn't understand. The most exhausting part was not hunger. It was memory, remembering what not to say, remembering which lie you told to which person, remembering to never contradict yourself. Children were the greatest risk. They spoke without filters. They asked innocent questions. They forgot which life was real. Parents taught them discipline harsher than any school. Never talk about before. Never ask why. Never answer more than asked. Every knock on the door froze the house. Was it a neighbor, a patrol, a test? Some villagers helped quietly. A loaf of bread left on a doorstep. A warning whispered at night. Others watched carefully. Fear made people suspicious. Suspicion made them dangerous. Living under a false identity meant living half alive. You breathed. You ate. You worked. But you never relaxed. Even laughter felt risky. At night, people lay awake, repeating their new story in their heads, just in case tomorrow demanded it again. Months passed, then years. The false life slowly became familiar. The real one faded, and that was the most terrifying realization of all. Survival was working, but it was costing them who they once were. By the 6th year of the war, surviving was no longer about running or hiding. It was about thinking faster than danger. Every sound, every shadow, every movement could mean life or death. Families trained themselves to detect the slightest change in routine. Footsteps that didn't match the rhythm of their street. Doors opening quietly when no one expected it. The distant hum of engines signaling patrols. Children became scouts in miniature. They learned to detect danger before adults could. A misplaced toy, a forgotten bag, all became lessons in awareness. Adults mastered prediction. They watched neighbors, noting the smallest irregularity. Was the baker unusually late? Did someone new arrive in the village? Was there a flicker of light in a forbidden window? Knowledge became a weapon stronger than any gun. People learned to use silence as a shield. No one spoke more than necessary. Conversations were carefully structured. Questions were avoided unless necessary. At night, families practiced drills. Crawl from one room to another silently. Move valuables under the floorboards. Communicate through whispers and hand signals. Some households built hidden exits behind fireplaces or beneath stairs. Others used false walls or secret compartments in barns. It wasn't just survival. It was strategy. By the time winter came, everyone had mastered the art of noticing patterns. When patrols took breaks, which neighbors were trustworthy, which routes were least risky. Some civilians even became small-time guides for others. They shared routes, warned of danger, and taught newcomers how to vanish. Every choice had consequences. Eat too early? Someone might notice. Sleep too long? Patrols could arrive. Speak too loudly? A child could be questioned. Yet, amidst fear, people also learned courage. Not the kind measured in bullets, but in calm decision-making under stress. By the 6th year, ordinary people had become extraordinary. Observers, strategists, silent heroes of their own lives. The war had not broken them. It had trained them, and every night, as they lay awake, waiting for danger to pass, they knew. They survived not because they fought, but because they outsmarted the war itself. By the 7th year, survival had become an art form, and hunger its constant companion. Families rationed every crumb. Every bite was calculated. Every meal could mean the difference between life and death. Children learned to eat slowly. Parents counted portions meticulously. Bread, potatoes, a small piece of cheese, all stretched across days. Sacrifice became routine. A mother would give her portion to a child. A father would skip meals to ensure the young survived. Siblings argued over water, yet quietly, because they knew silence could save their lives. The war had imposed brutal moral tests. Should they steal from abandoned houses? Should they trade possessions for food, even if it meant losing family heirlooms? Could they trust strangers, or risk everything for temporary sustenance? Every decision carried weight. In some towns, people formed secret sharing networks. They distributed supplies quietly, so no one family starved. But those who betrayed the network faced exile, or worse. Children witnessed these lessons early. They learned the cost of survival, the importance of thinking ahead, and the consequences of disobedience. Silence remained a constant companion. Voices were low, whispers carefully chosen. Even laughter was measured, for noise could attract danger. Yet, in this harsh environment, humanity flickered. Neighbors protected neighbors. Strangers offered food secretly. Communities shared knowledge, creating invisible shields around each other. Hunger taught resilience. Scarcity taught ingenuity. And fear taught discipline. People learned to turn small victories into hope. A loaf of bread found under rubble became a celebration. A warm jacket salvaged from a riverbank became priceless. A kind word, a quiet nod, a shared glance, all became currency in this new world. By the end of the 7th year, civilians were no longer ordinary. They were calculating, patient, and cunning. They could anticipate danger, ration resources, and make impossible decisions without hesitation. Survival had reshaped them. It had forged strength from vulnerability. It had created heroes without guns. And even in the darkest moments, a spark of hope remained. Because even when the world demanded impossible sacrifices, they survived. Not by fighting, not by hiding alone, but by outthinking the war itself. By the 8th year, survival demanded not just hiding, but disappearing in plain sight. People no longer fled only to forests or basements. The streets, the markets, even the schools became zones of danger. And yet, life had to continue. Families learned the delicate art of blending. Clothes were chosen carefully. Neutral, unremarkable, forgettable. Voices were softened. Movements were small and deliberate. Children practiced walking in patterns that mirrored the locals. Adults timed their errands to avoid patrols and curious neighbors. Some households created routines designed to look ordinary. They swept streets, tended gardens, or carried bundles of firewood, all to appear as if life had not been interrupted by war. Observation became their second sense. Who was watching from windows? Which patrols took shortcuts? Who could be trusted to speak? They learned to read body language with precision. Even a glance could reveal intentions. Civilians developed small signals: a knock on a door, a hand gesture, a subtle cough. Each signal communicated safety, danger, or instruction without a word. Adaptation became instinct. A new rule was learned every week. Avoid routines that could be tracked. Discard anything that could reveal identity. Move with the rhythm of the city, not against it. People became actors in a theater of survival. Every interaction was scripted, rehearsed, and executed with care. Forged papers, fake addresses, invented relatives, all were tools of the trade, and the cleverest could survive for weeks, even months, without anyone discovering their true story. Children played the most important roles. They carried messages, guided families through unknown routes, and learned to mimic adults flawlessly. Yet, even amidst mastery, fear never vanished. One wrong look could invite suspicion. One misstep could undo months of careful living. And still, they persevered. By the end of Chapter 8, civilians were no longer passive victims. They had become invisible forces, moving silently through a war-torn world, using brains instead of weapons. Every day was a lesson in intelligence, observation, and caution. And for those who mastered it, the war became something to outthink, not merely endure. By the 9th year, survival had become second nature, but the emotional toll weighed heavily. Civilians who had learned to vanish, to trade, to hide in plain sight, now faced internal battles that were invisible but relentless. Sleep became shallow. Dreams were haunted by sounds of footsteps, distant explosions, and whispers of danger. Even daylight offered no relief. The threat could come at any moment. Families carried trauma like an extra weight. Children who had survived by hiding in basements now flinched at sudden movements. Adults who had sacrificed meals, comfort, and peace carried silent guilt. Yet the lessons of war remained. Intelligence over impulse. They calculated every risk before moving. They predicted human behavior with precision. They measured words and expressions with care. Despite fear, life continued. Communities began to support each other in quiet, invisible ways, sharing small pieces of food, warning neighbors of approaching patrols, helping children navigate the dangerous streets. These gestures, though small, were lifelines. Some people began documenting their experiences. Secret journals, sketches of routes, hidden maps, all in case memories were lost, or in case someone else could benefit from their knowledge. Trauma had reshaped them. A mother who once laughed freely now measured joy carefully. A child who once ran carefree now stepped cautiously. A family that once celebrated birthdays quietly now marked survival milestones in secret. Every act of endurance strengthened their resilience. By understanding danger, predicting outcomes, and managing fear, civilians outlived the war in body and mind, even if their hearts carried scars. And yet, a glimmer of hope persisted. For every shadow that fell, there was a safe corner. For every threat, there was a strategy. For every loss, there was survival. This was no longer mere hiding. This was mastering existence itself. By the 9th year, those who survived were not just living. They were experts in human psychology, timing, and perception. Invisible warriors of an invisible battlefield. The war was over. The streets that once held fear and danger were quiet. The air that carried the sounds of destruction now held the scent of smoke, rubble, and new beginnings. Yet, victory did not erase the years of hardship. Families stepped cautiously, unsure if the silence was safe. They had survived through intelligence, stealth, and courage. They had traded, hidden, escaped, and adapted. And now the world was theirs to reclaim. But survival had changed them. Children, once innocent and carefree, now understood fear intimately. They had navigated the worst humanity could offer, and it left marks invisible to the eye but deep in the soul. Adults carried memories of loss, homes destroyed, neighbors gone, food stolen, loved ones lost. And yet, amidst the grief, there was a spark. Hope. People began rebuilding. Rubble was cleared. Markets reopened. Schools began to teach not just reading and writing, but the lessons of resilience. Those who had survived without weapons now understood the power of intelligence, observation, and patience. They were wiser, careful, and determined to live fully, even in a world forever changed. Communities slowly formed again. Neighbors shared resources, rebuilt homes, and taught each other the skills that had kept them alive. Stories of clever escapes, hidden basements, bartering networks, and vanishing acts were whispered, not as tales of heroism, but as lessons. And in quiet moments, families would gather and reflect. What was lost? What was learned? How life could continue? The war had taken much, but it could not take human resilience. It could not erase the lessons of intelligence, courage, and hope. By the end of the 10th chapter, civilians were no longer simply survivors. They were architects of new life, carrying forward the skills that had once kept them alive, blending caution with compassion, strategy with humanity. The shadows of war remained, but they no longer ruled. Sunlight broke through the ruins. Voices returned to the streets. Children played again, and humanity, though scarred, endured.